Well, hello there, everyone. It's your girl, Queen Evangeline, and today we are back with yet another video. So, as you can see from the title, we're going to be speaking on intergenerational trauma. And this is something that actually came up in my very first therapy session with my therapist. And how this came about was that I'm actually someone who doesn't speak, a whole lot about my feelings and what I might be going through. I just keep things to myself. And so, one of the reasons are, growing up like that, there wasn't really a safe space for communication, number one. And number two, I just try to save everybody that pain. But one of the main reasons that I actually, brought it up was that when I finally decided, because my mom was like, you need to speak on things. And when I finally decided to speak on things, my mom brushed me off completely. She dismissed me, actually. And so this is something that affects families, something that's so rife and prevalent in families, in society as a whole. I think that our older generation may have a different perspective with regards to our younger generation, and I think that many of us, like me, who now is an adult, and we and I've come to recognize toxic patterns and recognize toxic behavioral toxic behaviors. And once I bring that up and speak to another adult, such as a parent, there's just that conflict. And I think a conflict that takes place, there's just that it's like two bulls, and a crawl, and they're just fighting. So there is no common ground. And I think that there are so many stereotypes, so many stereotypes. There's just like a negative stigma that also surrounds, mental illness. I think in the past, our parents, they handle things differently to the way we would handle things. I've seen memes on social media. Parents will, like, if you have a child that's got depression, and parents will be like, depressie geëet, which is like, it's funny, it's a joke, but that is like, it just gives you some insight and ideas to how our older generation, handle things. And I think with the older generation, they would like dismiss problems and issues and just put it under the rug, ignore it. And I think, with regards to me, I'm speaking now from a personal point of view. I have two parents, both of which are religious leaders, and both, who work. And whereas my mom was actually more outspoken, my dad is someone who is very soft-spoken, an introvert. He is someone that keeps to himself, especially with regards to how his childhood was growing up. He had a very terrible, horrible childhood, one which I do not wish upon any child. And I think that ever since he's been a child, he's just been in survival mode up until now, in this present moment. And that's what many parents, have gone through it, many parents experience. And so I am my dad's twin. So I not only look like him, but we have the exact same personalities. So whereas my dad is someone who doesn't like speak on things, I'm exactly the same. I'm very withdrawn. I'm very to myself. And which is really, a toxic, it's bad. And so for my dad growing up in that horrible childhood, there was no safe space to communicate. There was no safe space, or even an environment, to grow, to flourish, to even exist. So that survival mode just kicked in instantly, from a very, very young age. And as I'm speaking now, I'm like thinking, like, my dad didn't have the chance to be a child. And my late grandfather took him in and raised him, to be the good man that he is today. And although my grandfather had, done much to be present and to make sure that my dad had a comfortable life, he worked for Cecil, so he had a very good job at Cecil. But with that was the disadvantage that working for such a company, he was traveling all over. He was in Namibia, Botswana, you name it, he's been everywhere. So whilst he was working hard to ensure that they had a comfortable life, he was not present. And as a result, my father is a present father, but not a present father, if that makes any sense. So is emotionally absent. So I had a father, but I did not have a father up until now. He wasn't there for me like I needed him to be. And it's even in the small things, like my dad does not show emotion whatsoever. You'll be like here and there where it actually shows emotion, and if he does, he doesn't he wants to hide it. It's only now recently where he started like showing affection in the form of a hug, and we're not like at that kind of hug yet, we're just like a side hug. So it's him trying to at least feel. Same with his sister as well. If I look at her and observe her, then I see that they're still living in that survival mode. They haven't lived as yet. And so now it's about to get deep. So as you would know, that I also had my fair share of trauma, and this is one of the reasons why I'm back in therapy, so that I could have healthy habits and healthy coping habits. I remember I was home, I think it was last year in December for Christmas. So I do try to go home as often as I can, but like usually it'll be like a weekend or a few days, of leave. I don't usually just go there and stay there for long periods of time, because after a certain period of time we start working on one another's nerves. I think as an adult, your eyes are more open, you're more observant to toxic patterns and behavioral patterns, and then you recognize it. Then there's a clash. And so I was home, and let me tell you, I had an emotional outburst, and I was crying. I was crying because I was exhausted. And I still feel like that. I feel like, mentally, emotionally exhausted. And I didn't know how to relay that, over to my parents. And that day was one of the days when I just woke up like on the wrong side of the bed. And, it was just me trying to diminish my feelings. And like, okay, you got this, you're going to get over it, you're going to be fine. But then I got to a breaking point where I just cried. So I'm in the living room having my crying episode there, and my dad is just there staring at me blankly with no emotion on his face whatsoever. And so he's looking at me, and I'm waiting for him to say something. And then he sits down. He was sitting on the one side of the living room, and then moved closer to where I was, and he sat down, and I sat down as well. And that's when he started speaking, and basically he said to me that at that point in time I was just overwhelmed, because I felt that I'd poured so much into so many people, even those who had abused me. And now that I started pouring into myself, it felt like I was making no progress at all. It felt like I was not happy. It felt like I was empty. It felt like I was being punished all over again. And that was the message that I was trying to relay. And sometimes I find it difficult to articulate myself, especially verbally. And that's why I was crying. And then my dad just looked at me and he said, in so many words, he said that it was my fault. It was my fault that, I was in an abusive relationship. It was my fault that I got raped. And I was upset, quite frankly. But then, me being me, looking at it from a different lens, because I'm always that person who always look beyond what is presented in front of me. And then I thought to myself, as much as I was speaking from a place of pain, I had to come to that conclusion. I had to come to that point where I came to the realization that whilst I was speaking from a place of pain, my dad was speaking from a place of pain as well. He was also speaking from a place of trauma, unhealed trauma. So the moment my trauma, it was like the trauma was pushed under a rug, under a carpet. And the moment now that I had a traumatic, experience, it was like it awoke. It was like the rug was taken from underneath him, and it was, taken from underneath him, and he was just left floored, literally. And that's when I realized there's so much unspoken trauma coming from my dad's side as well. And I had to realize that, okay, now maybe I also need to come and extend that hand of grace, because perhaps he also needs that. And even though I'm thinking along the lines of extending that hand of grace, I also needed to come to the realization that even though I wanted to extend the hand of grace and see the love, above everything that was in front of me, as much as he hadn't had the opportunity to be a child, I wanted in that moment to be a child, to be vulnerable. And when I spoke to the psychologist, therapist, she made mention that you will also need in your life, to have someone that you can speak to, someone that, when you're going to difficult time, that you can also speak to, that will listen. And that person is my aunt. And I would usually speak to and vent. And then I remember the evening of the accident, they came to pick us up at the police station. And so at that point in time, I was also just in survival mode. And the moment my aunt, arrived in the scene, and she hugged me, and immediately I started crying. And that I could feel safe, I could feel vulnerable. And I think everybody needs someone like that, to feel that safe, to have that space of vulnerability. We can feel vulnerable in a safe space. And I think that needs to happen in the home as well. As much as there is trauma, we need to come to a point where we would draw a line. We say, okay, this is where we stop. This is where we stop with the toxic pattern. This is where we stop with the trauma. Now we get healing. We get better, because we cannot. There's the saying where we I've also seen in social media where we speak on, if you do not heal, you don't people who didn't catch you. And that extends to relationships in the house as well, relationships with parents and children. If our parents don't heal, they're going to project their pain and their trauma onto their children. That is not what we want, because that trauma and the way we handle it is normalized, even though it's toxic and negative. And then we need to stop with that. We need to develop healthy coping mechanisms. We need to go for therapy and for counseling, and to get to a point where we look at healthier ways of even conflict resolution, healthy ways of resolving problems in the household. We have so many rebellious children, and it's always like, oh, you know what, this is naughty child. We have anxious children who are suicidal. We need to get to the root of the problem. We can no longer, afford to ignore what's right in front of us. That is just what I wanted to share, and I hope it reaches someone out there. I hope it reaches our parents. And it's difficult. I know, I really understand. It's difficult as an adult to speak to an older adult or parent and say, well, this is not good. This is not gaslighting or anything like that, because generally we always have the older parent would always say, well, I got more knowledge than you. I've been around this world been on this earth for 5 or 6 decades, so I know more than you. I've been in this world. And yet the world has changed as well, as generations are gone. With in a new century now, with new problems, and younger children, younger people who have hypertension, for an example. So we need to develop healthier coping mechanisms, and ultimately have a healthier generation moving forward. So yeah, I just wanted to share this with you guys. So keep well. Have a night.